senior policy analyst. Nathan, what's the feeling down in D.C. about how these tariffs are being rolled out by the administration, and maybe how much room there is for some negotiation?
Yeah, so, there's always room for negotiations. I mean, President Trump was posting on Truth Social today that, that there's been conversations with other countries, all the countries around the world, in terms of trying to figure out what's coming next. But what we're telling our clients is that, obviously headlines notwithstanding, President Trump is committed to the cause of implementing these tariffs. And we're seeing very little pushback from Republicans on Capitol Hill. We're seeing some angst, if you will, amongst the lawmakers, but nothing really trying to say or suggest that this is going to stop and this is going to continue. So whether or not President Trump proceeds with these tariffs or their push back or anything like that, this uncertainty in this market issue, if you will, is going to continue. So I think that we're in here for the long run, that this is what the story is going to be here from Washington.
Now, on the flip side, the tax package and the budget resolution that went through the House, went through the Senate. The Senate passed it on Friday. What's going to be the combination now between the House and the Senate bill? And do we get something meaningful, like some tax cuts or something that will help support the economy?
Yeah, so what the Senate did is they passed their budget resolution on Saturday. It was 51-48, but it differs pretty dramatically from the House version. What the Senate did, and I'm going to pick on them just because I think the Senate plan has the better chance of success, is that it made permanent the Trump-era tax cuts from 2017, which would effectively cost $4.5 trillion. Now, what the Senate did is they said, well, let's just presume that its current baseline and that the cost of that means zero. Now, that's important because that means that if this plan passes, this could add to the deficit. Now, there's been a lot of talk of tax stimulus, if you will. The Senate plan really doesn't have all that much because even though the overall price tag of this is going to run north of $5.5 trillion, if you presume that a bulk of that is just going for extending the tax cuts, there's about $1.5 trillion in additional stimulus, but a lot of that is like no taxes on tips or changing the SALT deduction. Great for New Yorkers, but ultimately not going to be all that much stimulating to the economy. So, we just aren't really seeing much of this, these plans come together saying there's going to be a massive stimulus at the end of the year.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't the Senate only here this week and then they have another vacation period of a couple of weeks? So if something doesn't happen like now, since we have to wait?
Yeah, so on the tax side, we're telling our clients, look, don't pay attention to this. You'll get the specifics in May. They'll probably figure this out in June or July. But, also the really big question is, and we're getting this from a lot of terminal clients this morning, are Republicans going to do anything to combat President Trump on these tariffs? We saw bipartisan legislation come out last week in the Senate. House legislation is coming today to try and claw back some of that authority and put that back into the congressional hands. Now, it's not going to pass this week because you're right. The Senate leaves at the end of this week and they're gone until April 28th. So that's like 400 years for the markets. But for for Washington, it's only 2 weeks. But, if you're looking for any type of relief on the tariff debate from Capitol Hill, it's not going to happen in the next 2 weeks.
I guess my question also is, why are investors still constantly so surprised by President Trump's tariff stance when, in theory, he's been real clear for a real long time?
Well, and that's exactly it. But I also wouldn't discount the soap opera portion of the White House. I mean, there are conflicting parts of the administration. You have Kevin Hassett and, Secretary of the Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent on one side saying, look, let's do a moderate approach, still have tariffs, but moderate. And then you have Howard Lutnick, our Commerce Secretary, and Pete Navarro on the other side saying, let's move forward. And when they both give conflicting statements, it's really hard for the markets to react. But what we go back to consistently is that President Trump does believe this. President Trump has been pushing out Truth Social statements all morning saying, we're going to proceed with this plan. And for us, and this is just my own personal opinion, there aren't that many, when the average American only has $400 in savings, there are a lot of Americans out there that don't have assets in the market. And then whether their world changed last week to today didn't change all that much. For us, we're going to have to see sticker shock and consumer confidence changes in order for President Trump to really start thinking about changing tariffs.
All right, Nathan, thank you so much for that. I always appreciate getting your views there. Nathan Dean,